I want to add my welcome to Bob's and also add Al Fitz's welcome to Bob's and mine. I somehow think this meeting has a lot of importance for us. I'm very excited to be here with a personage such as Bucky Fuller. As you know, the keynote speaker is R. Buckminster Fuller, philosopher, futurist, and by way of introduction, I only want to mention a brief quote which he shared with some of us at lunch. And it goes like this. If you know who I am, fine. If you don't, fine. Soon you will know who I am. Bucky, welcome to Digital.
That's great. I tell you, Don, if you could have that chair brought down,
Sure.
That'd be fine. I introduced myself a little bit. I'm now 85, and I'm probably double the age of anybody else here. So I know myself quite well, as anybody can, and I'm quite confident the only thing that really is important to be noted about me is that I'm an average, healthy human being. And I do have a record, and the only reason I have a record is that I undertook to see what an average, healthy human being might be able to do. If you're operated independent of the scheme that we're all brought up to assume is the scheme of life. And I didn't make up my mind to make this experiment until I was 32 years of age, which is 53 years ago. And I've been brought up, as very few of you brought up today, the working assumption when I was young was that the cerebral processes of the young are very unreliable, and only the older people know what's going on. And my mother would say to me, darling, never mind what you think, listen, we're trying to teach you. And that's exactly what they told me at school. So everybody was telling me, never mind what I thought. And because I knew they loved me, I did everything I could to try to put aside what I was thinking and try to learn their game. It was a game they had, apparently. And I was being told by my rich relatives, or not many of them, that life was very, very tough, and if you want to get on, you're going to have to deprive a whole lot of other people. It's a very tough game. So get over all that sensitivity you have. So I was being told to get over sensitivity, never mind what I thought. So I did everything I could to play the game that way. And not until I was 32 did I find that I absolutely made a mess of it. I couldn't get on with that game. And so I was an absolute failure and a complete throwaway, and I decided to make an experiment in my life, the rest of my life. And that time my wife and I were married 63 years ago. We had our second child was born. Our first child had died on our 4th birthday after going through spinal meningitis, infantile paralysis. Imagine what it meant to us to have a new child born. And at just that same time, I also was completely bust, and a lot of my friends thought I was going to be a great success in business, and they'd bet on me, and I lost all their money. So I was penniless and really in disgrace, and having this wonderful new responsibility, this new life. The question was whether I would try to leave it to her family and my family to look out for them and get out of the way, or whether I would really try to find out how and why human beings really are here, and see what I could, what a little unknown, penniless human being might be able to do effectively, if anything, that great nations and great private enterprises could not do inherently. As for instance, I said, I see that 3/4 of the earth is covered with water. The quarter that is dry land, more than half is covered with snow, rock, ice, deserts. Less than 1/8 of the surface of the earth is propitious to support human life, as human life finds it when they're being born naked, helpless, ignorant, and finding their way, hungry, thirsty. And I saw then that the propitious life-supporting areas were not just one great area, but little small areas. and humanity found those areas, and they didn't really know about other humans finding other areas, but they found from time to time them being invaded, if they did have successful carrying on, by people who were not successful. So they would guarded themselves. It became then guarded nations. We can understand how we developed a great many separate nations in remote parts around the world. I saw then that with over 100 nations at the time I started my experiment, back in 1927, that not one of those 100 had any very large amount of the total surface of the earth. And they were really just concerned with that. And while they had geography in schools that taught them about other people somewhere, we really didn't know. When I was young, for instance, we really, in geography, didn't know the name of other countries and so forth. We didn't know anything like a place like Okinawa and things like that. We had no idea whatsoever. There was something called the South Seas, and that was that. And it was a place you'd never get to. So we had then this situation where any one nation was only looking out for a very small part of the total surface of the earth. And they were concerned that way. They might get allies, but there was nothing that made them think about the total earth except school geography and so legends about people going around that world. So I saw then that the big corporations represented risks taken, bets being made, which have not realized profitably within a very reasonably short time, they'd go out of business. They'd go bust. So that they were very short-limited in both time consideration, and they said, this is not within our premises. So that I saw there was nobody. I luckily had a very interesting and very important kind of part of my experience in the United States Navy. I became a regular United States Line Officer, USN, during World War I, and I had some commands, and the Navy was interested in three-quarters of the earth that covered the water, which is very different from that dry land one. So I found myself being trained really to think about total earth and total resources. So I said then in 1927, I'm going to make this experiment to see what the little individual could do. I said, there's nothing to stop me of thinking about our total planet Earth as a spaceship. And I gave it the name Spaceship Earth, which began to stick as time went on. And I said, I'd like to know then how and why human beings are on board here. How humans happen to be in the universe. We have very extraordinary capabilities, and how do we happen to be here? And then what are the now so far discovered resources? What's the total know-how? How do we use the total know-how and the total resources to take care of everybody on board of the ship? Looking at it entirely in terms of human beings on board of a ship, humans in the universe, not the idea of looking out for them separately and divided the way they were prone to simply due to circumstances. So that meant then in 1927 I committed myself for the rest of my life to dealing only in total resources, total planet, thinking about everything we know about the universe itself, all that's being part of the great resources, and how and why we're here, and what I could do about as an individual to, if possible, help make human beings a success, make the inclusion within the design of the universe a success. Commit myself in that way. So I found there was absolutely nobody committed that kind of way, and I was penniless and said, one thing I know, and that is there are several billion human beings. I was 32 years of age. Life expectancy when I was born was 42, so I had only theoretically 10 years to go. And obviously I was not going to get anywhere with several billion human beings if I tried to ask them to listen to me. That's exactly what they won't do, and the only time I made my mind, I would never talk to people unless they asked me to talk to them, as you've asked me today. And that's the only time when people are really listening. Now, I also then said, I'm going to commit myself then not to words. I'm not going to go in for political reforms, because in order to get into politics, I'd have to do a whole lot of talking. I'm only interested in the fact that the way human beings are designed, to start off with, we're more than 60% water. Water freezes and boils within very small limits. We could not exist in any other planet other than this particular planet, this form, as a design within the extraordinary biosphere, where probability of freezing and boiling is not high, starting where we did naked in the South Sea islands, coral atolls and so forth, probably. And so I said, I see then that what made possible human beings finally discovering they could put something on and they could get into an area where it was colder than they'd been before. It took a long time before they learned then about that, and that didn't occur till we've had 4 known ice ages. And these great ice ages are about 1 million years. There's about a quarter of a million years between them. This sort of an average pattern of a sort of wave pattern comes. And with those great ice ages, there's then using up the waters of the ocean to build the ice caps, which lowers the water line of the coast. And we find then that we know that the time of the last ice age, what we call today the Philippines and Borneo, so forth, which has another name, but all those islands, enormous number of South Sea islands there, was a great peninsula. And for the first time, the ice then was driving the furry-coated animals south. And the furry-coated animals, for instance, we get to Bali, which is islands today when the melt occurred again. But Bali, there were tigers driven on the western end of Bali. There are tigers which were driven there when there was a peninsula. So suddenly human beings had to cope with animals they never had before. They've been dealing with fishes. They've been dealing with fruits. They've been dealing with water coming down the mountains and so forth. They've been dealing with floating, how to float and make very good boats. Anyway, they suddenly then had skins of animals. Some of them went out training, domesticating sheep and lambs, quite easy to handle, and goats, pigs. The others then went after horses and camels and even elephants and learned how to cope with them. Some of them they couldn't, some they just hunted. But when they got to the point then where they could they're following the sheep, and they're now connected to the mainland. They began to find the sheep leading where the grass was green. They were taking them up mountainsides they'd never been before, and they found they could take the sheep's skin and put it on and not be too cold. When you suddenly got to be cold areas. Then they took a second sheepskin and made a tent. But I saw they developed environment controlling. Gradually, it made it possible for humans to occupy more and more of the planet Earth. As we get even to more environment control, we get even to the moon as we do today. So finally then, one of the things that human beings did do is to develop environment control. So I commit myself in my grand strategy, see what the little individual could do, to developing technology of environment controlling. Technology environment controlling that would make it possible for human beings to exist more favorably under controlling conditions, whatever they might be. So I committed myself to technology, and quite clearly technology was going to require a lot of materials, and a lot of technology itself to produce more technology, and I was going to obviously need money, and there was nobody who was even mildly interested in my experiment in 1927. So and I was absolutely penniless, so I had to do some very important thinking here. I said, one of the things that I'm going to have to do is I'm giving up everything I've ever been taught to believe. I use the word believe to mean accepting explanations of physical phenomena without any experimental evidence. That's what I mean. But my grandmother said, "Darling, you're very young. How much I love you." And certain things I'm quite convinced happened 2,000 years ago, and because I love you so much, you can believe it. And so there's a great deal we take on that kind of basis of love and faith, good trust. So I said I'm going to have to give all that up and go entirely on my own experimental evidence. And I said, if I'm going to do that, then I said one of the first questions I'm going to ask myself is, in view of the fact that your life has demonstrated enormous numbers of human beings being prone to join some kind of religion. There's a tendency of humanity to most human beings to assume there's something greater knowledge or greater power somewhere they call God. So I said, do you have any experimental reason to have to assume a greater intellect to be operating in the universe than that of human beings? And I said, luckily I've had very good scientific training. And I just said, I'm overwhelmed by the generalized principles we discovered to be operating, such as the law of mass attraction of bodies, where the inner attractiveness varies the second power, the arithmetical distance of power, the inverse ratio. These extraordinary laws which we discovered to be operative, which can only be expressed mathematically, and mathematics is purely intellectual. And then we discover these laws they cannot qualify as what we call a generalized principle. They're ever an exception, which means these laws are inherently eternal, which is a very extraordinary matter, that human beings are allowed to come in on the great design of the universe itself. That we have that kind of access. We don't know any other phenomena having access to those laws. I said, I'm overwhelmed then because they're eternal, they're a priori. Otherwise, they're not invented by me or anybody else. We just discover them. So I said, I'm overwhelmed by an a priori intellectual integrity that seems to be operating here in the universe. Because I'm overwhelmed by it, if I'm going to go in this experiment, see what a little individual can do, I'm going to have to assume the brilliance of the design of an eternally regenerative universe. And I'm going to have to assume that humans are here for some very important reason. And if I'm really committing myself to then trying to fulfill that, which they've not been asking, I haven't had anybody ask that kind of question around me. Nobody ever explained to me any reason why we're here. I said, if I'm going to commit myself to the wisdom of having human beings introduced, at least experimentally, and I commit myself to trying to make them a physical success by developing better environment controlling so they can, because I said, one thing I know about all human beings through all history, problems, problems, problems. That we're here for problem solving. If you're any good at problem solving, you don't come to utopia, you come to where's problems to solve. That's the way it always goes. And that we're here quite clearly for local universe information gathering and local problem solving in support of the integrity of an eternally regenerative universe. And if I then do everything I can to help human beings then towards gaining the more information and solving local problems and so forth, if I do, then I'll be doing what nature wants done. I said, I see that the hydrogen atom doesn't have to earn a living before behaving like a hydrogen atom. In fact, I see that human beings, the only ones who have this game, is you have to earn a living before you get around to doing something you think needs to be done. So I said, I'm going to make the assumption then that if I'm doing what the universe wants done, the reason I'm included, and I've come into this game, or whatever it is, this extraordinary scene of universe, at a moment in history where there's just enough knowledge for the little individual to be educated to the point where he can behave a little differently, that I may be sort of a break point, and if I am coming in at this break point, I may be able to demonstrate what that is. So I'm going to then commit myself that way, and in fact, doing what needs to be done, I'll find myself getting on. Now that is 63 years ago, and my activity, for instance, the last quarter of a century, my annual expenditure, the things I do in way of research and development, runs a little over $250,000 for 25 years. And I don't have any business. I don't have anybody soliciting for me. I don't have any agents. I don't have any lecture bureau, so forth. Anybody wants me, they must, because they've heard about me and they've decided they really want me, they have to get on my office and find out whether they can come or not. But anyway, for instance, that's my lecturing last year, $180,000. And I say without any bureau, any promoting. And so apparently I find that I've been able to get on, and only the impossible happens. Because I say, I didn't go out to promote my doing this. You understand? I'm not ever allowed to do anything promotional. I'm absolutely convinced that nature's own gestation rates, I'm convinced that I'm trying to find out what nature's trying to do, so I mustn't promote. You understand? That'd be absolute break of integrity. So I've lived where only the impossible happens, and it only happens at the last second, too. You can't count on it ever. So I really went off the deep end completely, and I have lived that kind of life for that amount of time, and it is really pretty extraordinary. I'm now in this 53rd year of this experiment. I've learned a great deal, and by giving up all the things I've taught to believe and trying to find out what is, I've made a number of important experiments, discoveries. I'd like to get you in a frame of mind right now of realizing how badly you've been misinformed. I want you to realize how many ill-conditioned reflexes you have. I've been asked to speak to a number of important scientific bodies. As for instance, it's about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I was asked to give the monthly address to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology faculty club. And I said to that faculty club, I would like to see hands for all those in this audience who do not see the sun going down in the evening. There were no hands. I said, I'm astonished to be asked to speak to such ignorant people. You've known for 500 years the sun is not going down. What have you done in 500 years to coordinate your senses with your knowledge? Nothing. Go right on deceiving your own children and say, darling, look at the beautiful sunset. To leave deceiving your own children. If you had any kind of educational system here, you would be learning how to coordinate your senses with your knowledge. I find it absolutely easy to get a little child, if you don't keep saying sunrise and sunset to them, but help them then to coordinate their information looking at space facing the north, or say, in the evening, and they can get the feeling that the Earth's revolving to obscure the sun absolutely cleanly. You make a little model, make a model of the Earth, take a globe and put a little paper doll on the map, because the children understand map very nicely. This is where you are, and you can see your shadow. And I have a searchlight over there on a flashlight on a stool, and here's revolving this thing. You see your shadow get longer. So get all those things that give them the clues that the Earth is revolving. And they get it absolutely right away. So our working assumption that children are absolutely stupid and need little bottles to pour information into is absolutely wrong. And that I find the grown-ups have a very, very incredible amount of misinformation. For instance, I'm sure everybody in this room uses the words up and down very spontaneously. You think, what else could I use? Absolutely logical, you say. The words were invented to accommodate the misconception for thousands or millions of years that the Earth was, because we're so tiny, the Earth is so big, the Earth is flat. And it's a plane going to infinity. That all the trees and all the people are perpendicular to it, and all the perpendiculars of the same plane are parallel to one another, so they only go in two directions, up and down. Where you got heaven and hell. And everybody thinks that's perfectly logical. The fact is, if you're on the sphere, no perpendiculars are parallel to one another. None. And we are so tiny, the Earth is so big, it's very easy to deceive ourselves. We took blocks of marble, cut them out rectilinear, and they seem to sit one on top of the other, and everything seemed to be nice X, Y, Z coordinate, 90 degrees. The fact is, without steel, you couldn't get to a very high building. You could get up to a pyramid, let everything tip inwardly towards itself, which is the most stable way you could do that. But if I build a building today using steel, I'm going to take two buildings side by side, each with a city block base, but they start touching. If you use the most finest instruments we can really get, the kind we would be using in space programs, not until you get the 100th story would you have an inch between the two. And the way masons operate and so forth, that kind of measurement is 32nd of an inch. You would never get that at all to stay right together. So we can understand how easy it was for people to fool themselves into thinking that because that rectilinear things fitted together, that we really were on a flat. Wide world, four corners of the Earth, so forth, all the things you keep saying all the time. Now, I want to get then to the point that we not only don't have up and down, the Earth is completely revolving, and somebody say, yes, I do. I say, what star were you pointing at when you said that? Because we just revolved away. Well, the fact is, we have no up and down. There's no up in the universe whatsoever. I heard the President of the United States on the TV with all the world listening, congratulating the astronauts on getting up to the moon, when they spoke about being up here on the moon. With the beautiful instruments, we got them up there, but their knowledge was incredibly poor. They could talk about being up here in the moon. I've talked to astronauts about this many times since. Anyway, what are the right words? The right words, if you learned in flying long ago, you don't go up in an airplane, you go out. You go out, you come in for a landing, you go out. In and out. Words are in, out, and around. Out is any direction. You go in to go out on the other side. Out is any direction. In is always point to it. Go into the moon, into the Earth, and into this house. In is specific, and out is the generalized, all directions. when you use the words out, in and out and around, you're going to find yourself getting into a world that you're actually in very much in digital, in the electronic world. Only in this century did we learn about the electromagnetic spectrum. The first chart of the electromagnetic spectrum was not published until 1930, after World War I was well over. Really the depth of the crash. The Westinghouse Company, the first ever published, the long, mile-long radio waves of World War I. It was only in this century to learn that every chemical element has its own electromagnetic frequency wavelengths and so forth. So 1930, here's suddenly this great chart, and all these different, here's the different metals, there's unique frequencies and wavelengths, and finally got the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, where you and I could tune in, then ultraviolet and out. By 1930, we realized that reality, which up to the time I was born, was everything you could see, smell, touch, and hear. We learned by 1930 that the reality that we were dealing in was only less than a minute. It was directly tunable by our given sense of frequencies, our sensorial frequencies and wavelengths. Today, 99.9999% of everything that's going to affect all of our lives tomorrow is being conducted in the realm of reality, non-directly contactable by the human senses. That's all occurred in my lifetime. Going from this thing of everything you could just see, smell, touch, and hear. So, when I was 3, the electrons discovered. Didn't get in any newspaper because you couldn't see it, so they were not interested. Take a picture of it. So, I want you to realize what a discrepancy there is between all the ages before you and you're today. This is what digital is about, dealing with the great invisible reality. That's what it's all about. It's extraordinary. And so I'd like to get you some reorientation like that. But if you find of using words in and out, then that's the language of tuning. You tuned in and tuned out. And you find...
Wait just a minute. Your mic went off, okay?
Just a minute. Cut off? Am I cut off?
Yes. Here, 1 minute, and I'll get it.
I'm sorry.
Oh, don't be sorry. Let's just figure it out. No.
You hear me? No?
How about the plug in the back?
I moved too far?
I think it's here.
No.
Plug right there. On the step.
Here?
Yeah. Trickle out of it.
I had a feeling like something behind me did pass. Can you all hear me all right? I'll just keep on while they're working on it. Can you hear me in back? When you use the words in and out, as you do in electromagnetics, tuning in, tuning out, I want you to think of the difference between the reality of touch, see, smell, and hear that I was brought up in, and what used to, and we had what we call things, and then we had space. Things and space. Only if it wasn't something you could see, smell, touch, and hear, it was space. So now, when I say tuning in and tuning out, there are available here right now. Any place you would be around the world right now, you could, if you had 2 million wideband radio sets, you could tune each one in a different program. They're present right here, more than 2 million programs propagated by human beings in this room. And many more programs than the ones that human beings are programming, but the point is, the fact that you're not tuned in doesn't mean you're not. In other words, you don't happen to be tuned in. In other words, the minute you begin to talk this way, you have quite a different idea even about life and death. But you happen to be tuned in. If you're not tuned in, doesn't mean that you don't exist. Understand? So I want to point out the kind of investigation I began doing and the kind of serious search I committed myself to began to really disclose any number of ways in which I had to really correct things. I saw that practically none of the religions could get on all right without up and down, because they had to be able to ascend into heaven. So if you couldn't ascend into heaven, if you didn't have an up, you couldn't ascend into heaven. So religion had to break down. So you sacrifice the knowledge of human beings. How to really get on the reality. Are you hearing me in the back all right?
Off and on.
Now, I'd like to also point out too that any of you pilots fly airplanes? Are you used to calling up the airport and getting a meteorologist and getting your weather? And he will tell you it's blowing in gusts from the northwest 30 miles an hour, which is complete misinformation. You can take a piece of ball of string go up in the attic and fasten that string, or just lay it down and start going around out the door and around the hallways and downstairs